Hi, welcome to Woodcraft Spokane. My name's Steve and Joel's running the camera for us today. So we're going to talk about overhead drum sanders. Probably not the most exciting subject, but we'll try to pass along some information. So, what do we know about overhead drum sanders? They come in all kinds of different configurations. Here, we have what's called a 1938, and it is the Supermax brand. 1938 means I have a surface here of 19 inches. To get 38, I can flip the product. So 19 to 19, my abacus, your abacus should be 38. So the idea behind the drum sander versus the planer. I know that's a question, Joel, I think we get asked all the time out on the floor. Even with the sharpest planer knives we have, my planer, when I'm done with it, is going to have some tooling marks on it. And so a planer does not replace a sander, nor does a sander replace the planer. When I bring product off my planer, I bring it over to my sander. I can put different grits on there, anything from 40 grit on up through, I think, 300 grit, depending on the manufacturer and the maker of the paper. So the idea behind this is an overhead drum sander. So the motor drives this drum that's right here. It also has a mechanized conveyor belt on it. The thing that we like about the Supermax is they have what they call Intellisand. I call it smart sand. I just replaced and brought into my shop a 2550 Supermax. I replaced an old 1632 Performax that I had that was a great machine, but owning a cabinet shop, I needed something bigger. The idea behind the 25s is most of our doors max width is about 24. So I can run those cabinet doors when we complete them through the sander, single pass each side, and they're done, ready to go onto the cabinet, and out the door they go. The way Intellisand works is, Joel, I don't know if you can see this over here, or if you want to, maybe if I did this, it would be easier to see. Right here. With our Intellisand, the idea behind it is I come over and I'm adjusting my belt speed. Well, I don't have to try to figure it out with Intellisand because I can take and move this to max, which is 100 on their dial. And as the wood is being sent through the sander, if it senses it bogging down or senses an area that's a little heavy, it automatically slows the belt, Joel, hence Intellisand. So what we do in my shop is we just turn it on to max and let the brain work decide if it needs to be slowed down or sped up. One of the complaints on these things, Joel, and Supermax has done a great job, is the changing of the paper. It's always a pain to try to get your finger in here because there's this little clip that anchors this paper right here, Joel. I don't know if you can see my thumb right there, but what I'm doing is I'm lifting up on a clip and I'm shoving the end of that paper through. And then I can take and go like that. So here's the way paper works. It's going to come off, on the back side of this paper is going to be an arrow. This thing spins in a certain rotation that you need to be conscious of. So when you remove your paper the first time, note which way that arrow's pointing on the paper that you're bringing or that you're taking off. And what I've done is take a Sharpie and made arrows on the face of my drum, so I always have my orientation square matching up my arrows to arrows. You take and you put your paper on. You take and put your paper on, get it laid out, Get it as tight as you can. Where I'm a little loose right here, before I even started sanding, I'm going to come back over here to my little clip, and I'm going to work that down, Joel. There. I've tightened that up. So now I'm in pretty good shape. If this was set up to sand right now, I could sand. I always, after about the first 10 minutes, every time we're sanding, I shut this off, Joel, and I'll actually tighten up my paper because I believe that it's probably expanding a little bit and settling in as we're using it. One of the other key things, Joel, with a overhead drum sander, whether it's a single drum, gosh, they make double, triple, and even quadruple drum sanders, is it is not meant to evacuate sawdust with a dust or with a vacuum. The orifice on this is a setup for a 4-inch dust collector. So we're able to take and go right into a 4-inch on that, Joel, and right to our dust collector. Not a shop sander. It will not evacuate enough of the sawdust. You'll be jamming and gumming up your paper. This paper is expensive. If it's taken care of, you get lots of life out of it. This, Joel, is one of the handiest little tools there is that comes or made for your sander. What it is a cleaning block. So as this paper plugs up, with it running, I'm going to take and go over my paper, Joel, and I'm going to do that depending on the wood species, and that I may be doing that every half hour to an hour.
It's like a giant eraser.
It is exactly a giant eraser, Joel. What it's doing is it's cleaning the pores of that sandpaper up. Adjustments on this thing, Joel, the big adjustment is the height of the drum. Where does it start? So on these models, each quarter turn represents a 64th of an inch. So what I'll do is I'll come over and I'll take my wood and I'll get it close. So I'm bringing it down, assuming this is my wood. I'm bringing it down to where my drum is just starting to make a little bit of contact. I'll turn on my belt so that it's running, and I'll keep bringing it down until I have contact. There we go. That's where I would start running this through, Joel. If it doesn't start sanding, then I'll do a quarter of a turn. If it doesn't start sanding, I'll do a quarter of a turn till I have contact. And then I'll start running it there. Anywhere between half of that quarter turn to a quarter turn. I usually don't try taking any more than a quarter turn pass on this. Again, I'm trying to prevent burning. I'm trying to prevent gouging or cupping on this. If I run a piece through here and it does get stuck in the middle because I have a high spot, it will create a crater in there. So we're trying to avoid that. The sander comes in a couple of different versions. This happens to be an open stand sander, meaning that I have all this storage room down below. They make, in my 2550, they make a closed stand. Same footprint, same size of the sander. So for the little bit extra, and I think it was less than $100, Joel, I ordered the closed stand because that way I could stuff all my extra paper and stuff associated. My eraser and stuff is all right there inside a cabinet and protected. And Joel, what do we always say here?
Safety first.
Safety first. So we don't run our sander with this open other than if I'm using my eraser. One of the things I've learned on this, Joel, because these in-feed and out-feed tables, They're collapsible. If I'm doing small pieces, I may not be using my in-feed and out-feed table, but I was standing at the end of my sander the other day because my shop assistant was running some pieces, and my shirt tail actually caught on that conveyor belt and wanted to start bringing it in. So we want to make sure that stuff like shirt tails, hoodies this time of year, that kind of stuff, that we're conscious about making sure that we're keeping it away from this lower feed belt and the upper belt. If I've got a hoodie on, which I wear in my shop all the time this time of year, and I've bent over here and it's running, it could suck me right into that sander. So the first thing I do with all my hoodies is cut the strings off of them. That's how we know they're shop hoodies. The tables themselves, they can be a little persnickety to adjust. So in talking to, persnickety, Joel. Wow. In talking to one of our fellow associates, we call him Mark, he had a great idea on how to get that in-feed and out-feed table flat. So I took it home and went with his idea where I took a couple squares, 4-foot squares, and I put them on here and one on here, laying out this way. So then I brought my drum, so it was just putting light pressure on that square, just enough that it was making just an inkling of contact. And then I was able to bring my in-feed table right up to the bottom of the square on both sides, cinch it down, bring my out-feed table right up to the bottom of the square on both sides, cinch it down. And so that way I had good adjustment on my in-feed and out-feed table, because if this is cupped, or if these are up or down, they'll create what's called snipe, and that's a problem when we're running our boards through here. So Joel, do you have any questions, or do we have any questions? Is anyone even watching us today?
Yes, we are. I have a question. Do you have to change your game if you're dealing with hardwoods versus softwoods?
It's not necessarily, Joel, that's a great question about hardwoods versus softwoods. It's not necessarily changing our game, but it's deciding what paper that we're going to use. Pretty typically, 90% of the time we're sanding with a 120 grit in the cabinet shop, because at 120, I can send that to my finish gal without any problems. It's very seldom do I need to go to a coarser paper, or it's very seldom do I want to go to a finer paper. Joel, you know, being the finishing god that you are, that if we go too fine on our paper, it shears the grain, and then we don't get good penetration of our stain or our clear coat. What other questions, Joel, do we have?
I don't have any from anybody right now.
Okay.
But I do ask people, and they probably can't hear me because you've got the mic, to ask away right now.
Okay. And I know in my shop, Joel, the amount of time that we've saved by bringing that 25-incher in so that we don't have to hand sand doors anymore is huge. And let's face it, Joel, time is money. Anything else you can think of? Well, I'd like to give just a couple more minutes here if anybody's got a question out there, or we can recover something. Joel, do we have time for a quick safety story?
Go for it.
Well, I own a saw stop too, and we get questions all the time. Does it work? How does it work? Is it worth the money? Well, I want to show you something that happened to me on Thursday. Can you catch that, Joel?
Can't hardly see it. Oh, yeah, they can see it.
That little scratch right there was my finger touching the blade of a saw stop. I don't even think it bled, Joel. I'm not going to be able to tell this story for very long because I don't even think I'm going to have a scar. So If you got questions about SawStop, come see one of us. I'll give you actual testimony about what it's like to stick your finger in a SawStop, because I just did it Thursday. It scared the bejeebies out of me, but again, I didn't even need a Band-Aid on this thing. So for $83 and some odd cents, I was able to replace my brake, and I was back sawing again. And that was just a huge question, Joel, of stupidity on my part, being in a big hurry. So SawStop works. Joel, do we have any more questions?
We do. I think I'm going to kind of paraphrase here. How do you adjust the in-feed, out-feed tables so they can go up and down?
Again, Joel, they are meant to be stationary. They are meant to match the height of your roller table. That's where we go to that trick that our fellow associate Mark came up with taking a level and putting it here across, putting it here across, having the drum make contact with it, and then coming up underneath, and every machine is going to be different on how these attach, coming up underneath and making sure that the top of this in-feed table touches the bottom of that level. And then the top of this out-feed table touches the bottom of that level. That's the easiest, slickest way I've ever seen to adjust those.
How do you set up your dust collection on yours, on something like that?
And that's a great question on dust collection, Joel. In my shop, the way that it's ran on setting up my dust collection, Joel, is I set it up so that I have a dedicated hose off of my run when I'm using this that is doing nothing but evacuating the sawdust out of this 4-inch orifice. Did that answer your question?
Don't have any more.
Well, with that being said, we're coming into crunch time. I think Christmas is 5-6 days away. I want you to know our shelves are stocked. We still have stocking stuffer and Black Friday stuff left. We'd love to help you meet the needs of your woodworkers. And at home, we have all kinds of gift ideas. Come down, tap into our knowledge and experience down here. We're here to serve. We're hoping everyone's having a merry, safe Christmas. Remember the reason for the season. Thanks, Joel.